go. Welcome to today's webinar on how to help families claim their 2021 tax credit. I'm so pleased that you're joining us. This is an opportunity for families to get significantly more income than they usually have. And many families need to understand that this opportunity exists and how to get help taking advantage of it. So we're very grateful that you're interested in working with us to help families with this opportunity. We do hope that at some point this credit will get expanded for more years, but right now it's only for 1 year, but it's still an enormous amount of money for many of the low-income families. Next slide, or actually let's start sharing the slides, sorry. So this is a project that is being run, actually we have the wrong Debbie on there. I'm Debbie Stein, not Debbie Weinstein, but we have both Debbies in this project. This is a joint project of the Coalition on Human Needs and the Partnership for America's Children. Next slide, please. The Coalition on Human Needs is an alliance of national groups, service providers, faith groups, policy experts, labor, other advocates, and they work together at the federal level to advocate to meet the needs of peoples with low incomes and also to increase knowledge of good programs that serve people with low incomes. Next slide. And my organization, the Partnership for America's Children, has over 50 members that are multi-issue child advocacy organizations in 40 states. Voices for Georgia's Children is one of our members, and our mission is to support our state and local advocates in working to improve policies for kids at the state and local level. Next slide, please. So the speakers today, one is me, Debbie Stein, and I lead the Partnership for America's Children, and I've been doing work with low-income children and families on the policy side for over 35 years, and I've been running the Partnership for America's Children since 2015. Next slide. And we also have today with us Eleni de Fatseca, who is a child tax credit outreach coordinator at the Coalition on Human Needs and has been helping launch this outreach project. And before she joined the Coalition on Human Needs, she worked in East Harlem in New York, working with public housing residents on health and on aging services. So Eleni and I will be sharing the presentation today, but before we do that, we're going to take the slides off for a moment and share a welcome from Erica Fenner-Sitkoff, the Executive Director of Voices for Georgia's Children. We need to go back and figure out what happened to the sound.
When you share screen, you may have to check the boxes on the bottom left for sharing sound and optimize for video. Maybe the issue.
Okay, maybe it's because I'm muted. Hold on.
Oh, yeah, that's probably it. Try that.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining this call today. We are excited to offer you an opportunity to help Georgia families claim thousands of dollars in tax credits this year. The Partnership for America's Children, our national membership organization, is working with the Coalition on Human Needs to give service providers and state agencies throughout Georgia a set of tools to support families in claiming the credit. The toolkit and strategies that we will share in this webinar will make it very easy for you. You don't need to be tax experts to help them. Your role is to share information that shows how much money they stand to gain, to make sure they understand that they can claim the credit even if they usually don't file taxes, and to steer them to free tax experts who can help them file a tax return. Here at Voices for Georgia's Children, we know that too many of Georgia families are struggling to make ends meet and to provide their children with basic necessities. A few $1,000s can make it much easier for parents to make ends meet and for children to thrive. We also know that families that have already received part of the credit in 2021 fared much better. Fewer Georgia children went hungry, fewer Georgia families were at risk of eviction. We want to make sure that everyone eligible for this credit gets their full payment. Today, we will show you who is eligible, which is nearly everyone, and give you a variety of ways to help them, depending on what works best for your organization. After today, you can also reach out to our presenters if you need more help. Thank you again, and take good care.
So Erica couldn't be with us today, but she did want to open the webinar for us. And then we're going to go back to the slides. And let's start by talking about what is the expanded child tax credit. Next slide, please. In 2021, the Congress and the President created the American Rescue Plan, which expanded the child tax credit for the tax year of 2021. This expansion is so big that if we can make sure that all the families that are eligible for the credit get it, we can cut the number of children in poverty in this country by about 40%. At least as important, if we can reach those poorest of the poor, the people who live under half of the poverty level, we can lift approximately 1.1 million children out of deep poverty, out of living in a household with only half of the poverty income, so that while they'll still be poor, they'll have a lot more resources. And we know moving kids out of deep poverty into sort of the higher levels of poverty, which is a hard thing to say, but real, they'll do a lot better. We are doing this work because as part of the focus group research we conducted, we learned that service providers and state agencies are some of the most important voices in helping families claim this credit. Next slide, please. So the credit got expanded in several ways, and I'm going to talk about the three biggest ones because only one of them got a lot of attention. The first, and the part that you've probably seen and heard about, is that families were eligible to get half of the child tax credit in 2021 in what was called advance payments, in monthly payments that started in July and were paid out monthly through December. Families that got those payments have to file a tax return in 2022 to get the second half. Families that didn't get that, and we'll talk about why that was in a moment, can still get the whole credit so long as they file a tax return. So the bottom line is we need all families to file a tax return to get that credit, even if they don't normally file a tax return, even if they make so little money that they're not required to. The second way it was expanded, and this got a lot less attention, is that the amount of the credit was nearly doubled. So in the past, parents or caregivers got $2,000 per child. Now they get $3,600 for children under age 6 and $3,000 for every child age 6 through 17. And it also used to be you only got it for kids up through age 16 for some reason. So they raised it so you got the 17-year-olds too. The third part of the expansion, and the one that requires the most attention and work from people who work directly with children and families, is that there's no minimum income requirement. Families who had absolutely no earned income can still get the full credit. And tied to that is the fact that the credit is what we call fully refundable, which means that a family can file a tax return, and even if they don't owe a penny in taxes, the full amount of the credit will be paid back to them as a refund. So that means that a family where the parents were unable to work during the year and they were getting by on unemployment benefits or being supported by family and friends, they can claim the credit and they can get that money. Disabled parents who are living on Social Security and who were not previously eligible for this credit for the first time are. Senior citizens who are living on Social Security and raising their grandchildren or their great-grandchildren and don't have earned income can file and get the credit for those children. A lot of people who were not previously eligible and who assume that they still are not eligible, in fact, can get this credit. But someone needs to explain to them that they are eligible. Next slide, please. I want to give you an example of just how much this can mean to a family. Imagine a family with one adult, a 4-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 15-year-old. In total, for the 2021 tax credit, for that year, that family can get nearly $10,000. And that's just the child tax credit. When this family files a full tax return, they will probably also get their third stimulus payment, which is $1,400 per person, because one of the reasons they didn't get the advance credit is they never claimed their stimulus payment. If they had some earnings, they may also be eligible to get the earned income tax credit. If they had significant earnings and they paid for childcare, they may be able to claim the child and dependent care tax credit. If they have older dependents, there's another credit they may be able to get. So it is pretty easy to imagine a scenario where this family of 1 adult and 3 children can end up getting back a lot more money, close to $20,000. You can imagine what a difference that makes for a family that is struggling to get by on, food stamps and shared housing and pennies here and there. Next slide, please. So why do we need to reach out to these families? Why are they not getting the payment automatically? Because 4 million or more children are at risk of missing out on these payments. These are families who did not file tax returns in 2019 or 2020, and they didn't claim their economic stimulus payments. As a result, the IRS doesn't know who they are, where they live, or that they're raising children. So the IRS had no way to automatically send out the payments. And if they don't file for their credit now, they're never going to get it. This is particularly important for Black and Latino kids because they were disproportionately excluded from the full child tax credit even before it was expanded. And even now, they're more likely to miss it. So we particularly want to make sure that their families know they can claim it. The partnership in the Coalition on Human Need, when we started this effort, conducted a set of focus groups with families who didn't file taxes and didn't claim the stimulus payment. And we learned the reasons why they didn't do this. And we also learned that trusted community organizations and state agencies are the voices that they will listen to if they are told that, yes, in fact, you can claim it and this is what you need to do. And that's why we're reaching out to you to ask you to reach out to these families because our research shows they'll listen to you. I also want to say again, you don't have to be a tax expert. We're not asking you to give them tax advice or help them file the forms. We're asking you to connect them to free tax filing assistance with trained volunteers. So what we want you to do is connect them to the people who will help them file the tax return. Next slide, please. So I want to go over the minimum requirements for who's eligible, and then I want to talk about how families claim it. Next slide. These are the 4 basic things that families need to have to claim the credit. First of all, the adult who is filing the tax return does not have to have a social security number. They do not have to be a documented immigrant. They can either file with a social security number or with something called an ITIN, an individual taxpayer identification number. That's something the IRS has set up so that people who have a tax obligation but don't have a social security number can still pay taxes. And that may sound a little strange, but millions of people in this country pay their taxes like that every year, and it's a very safe system. We'll talk a little bit later about how families that don't have an ITIN can get one. However, the children have to have a social security number, which in most cases means that the child would be a citizen. And you'll see that a lot. One of the parents in a family might be a citizen or have a green card, and the other one might not and might need an ITIN, but the kids will be born here and they'll be citizens. Those families can, or both parents may not have documentation, but the children will have social security numbers because they were born here. Those families can claim the credit. The second thing is that the family has to have a close family relationship that's spelled out. So the taxpayer who is claiming the child, that child must be their biological or adopted child, their grandchild, their stepchild, their younger sibling, their step sibling, their half sibling, or a descendant of any of one of those. So a great grandchild or the child of a stepchild. It can be any of those, or it can be a foster child placed in that family by a government agency. The third requirement is that the child must have lived with the adult in the same household in the US for 6 months and a day, at least half the year. And so when a child is moving around between households, only one person can claim them, and that's the person the child lived with for more than half the year. And the final one is the child can't have been supporting themselves. The taxpayer or the tax filer has to have been the person who provided at least half their support. Next slide, please. So as I said before, most families in 2021 automatically got those advanced child tax credit payments, and you probably heard about that. You may have also seen the consequences. We know from research that families that got that child tax credit did a lot better. The number of children who went hungry, the number of families at risk of eviction all dropped dramatically when those payments started, and they're rising again now that the payments have ended. But most families got it automatically. Families that had not filed tax returns and didn't claim the economic stimulus payment had to take steps to get the advance payment. They had an online portal where they could go and put in some basic information. And some families did that, but many families didn't take steps and didn't get the advance credit. Both families that got the advance credit and families that didn't need to file tax returns this year to get the rest of the credit, whether it's the full credit or half the credit, or sometimes it's a number in between there. They must file a tax return in 2022 to get their full share of the child tax credit from 2021. And families don't know that. So what we're asking is for you to help them understand that this is true, that they should file, and then tell them how to get help filing. Next slide, please. Here's the timeline for what we're working on. And I'm going to walk you through it because what I want to make clear is this is not just through the current tax season, that we can continue to reach out to families and they can continue to claim the credit through the entire calendar year of 2022. The tax filing season began, of course, last month, or actually, I guess now it's 2 months ago. And that's when volunteer income tax assistance sites, VITA sites, opened up. These are sites which are funded by the IRS. They have some paid staff and a lot of trained volunteers who know how to fill out tax forms and will do that for people. They serve low-income people, and the service is available for free. And so people can make appointments and go to those sites and get help filing their taxes. You don't have to be the tax expert, and the family doesn't have to be the tax expert. This will connect them to free help. April 18th is the official end of the tax season. And at that point, families who were required to file their taxes must either have filed them, or in theory, they are supposed to request an extension. And you can get an extension through, I think, October, just by filing a form. But families that are obligated to file can file a tax return after April 18th, even if they didn't file for an extension. And in most cases, they won't face a penalty. That's because when you file your extension, you're supposed to also pay any taxes you owe. But the families we're working with don't owe taxes. They're going to get money back. So even if they didn't ask for an extension, they can go ahead and file in May and July and October and get their credit, and they won't pay a penalty. In addition, families that weren't required to file tax returns can file at any time. They're not even expected to ask for an extension. Those are families where a single person makes less than about $12,500, a head of household, which is pretty much what we're talking about. You have to have a kid in the household to get the credit. I think the income limit is about $18,500, and married couples, it's a little bit over $25,000. So people whose income was under that aren't even required to file, but they can, and they can do it at any time during the year. This is important because in May, the IRS and an organization called Code for America are going to open up something called a simplified online filing portal, and it will be at getctc.org. And that is where people who are not required to file tax returns can go ahead and put in very simple information and claim that child tax credit. And we think probably also that third economic stimulus payment. And we would prefer that everybody filed a full tax return, because that way they will claim other credits that they're also eligible for. But if they had no earned income and they don't think they're eligible for other credits and they want to take the simple system, that online simplified portal is a really easy way to claim the credit, and it opens in May, and it's going to stay open through late fall of 2022. It'll probably close down sometime in October or November. So we're asking you both to encourage families to file a full tax return right now, but if they don't, to keep encouraging families to file a tax return throughout 2022. Next slide, please. So we keep saying you don't have to be the tax expert. How do you get them to a tax expert? There's basically 4 options here. The first is you can identify a local FIDA site for people to go to. And you can do that either by using the link at the top of the page, getyourrefund.org, where there's a link of FIDA site providers. Or you can also call the 211 line. And I believe in most states, what you do is you select option 1 after you choose your language, and they can tell you where a VITA site is near you. Some of them can even schedule an appointment for you depending on your zip code. It's important to call and not just show up so that somebody is available to meet with you. And it's also important for married couples, if they're going to file jointly, which most married couples will, they both have to go because they're both going to have to sign the paperwork. So make sure the appointment is a time when they can both go. That's the first way. Just connect them to a VITA site, get them an appointment, or tell them how to get an appointment, and they can go to those tax experts. You can also go to the main page on getyourrefund.org, and there are 3 other options there. The first is that for people who are comfortable working online and handling their financial records, there's free tax filing services online. It's, essentially tax software, much like you would pay for. But it also has a chat feature. So when they have questions, their questions get answered. And a lot of people use that very successfully and do their taxes themselves. A second way to do it is to get free tax help with a VITA site volunteer, but do it online, uploading their documents so that the tax specialist can see it, and then discussing their situation with the tax specialist over the phone. And for people who don't want to do any of that, who don't have the documentation for filing the full tax return, and who just want to claim the credit, they can sign up to be notified when getctc.org, which is that online simplified portal, opens up in May of 2022. Getyourrefund.org will also help people figure out what's best for them, so that people who are really missing out on money unless they file a full return will know that, and people who really are probably better off just going to getctc.org. And that might include people who aren't eligible for other credits and who don't have certain key documents like their social security number. They may be better off just filing online. And the Get Your Refund website will help people figure out what option is best for them. Next slide, please. There are some other free tax assistance options. One is that the AARP Foundation has a tax aid sites which also provide free in-person and virtual tax assistance, and they focus on individuals who are over 50 or have low to moderate incomes. And you can click on this link to find those sites if your local VITA site isn't taking people, and see if you can get help there. The other kind of tax assistance that people need is after they filed a return and a problem has come up. So one problem might be they file their return and the IRS tells them they cannot claim the child because someone else claimed the child first. And that might happen when a couple has split up and the parent who isn't the custodial parent claims the child as a dependent. Maybe they think they're entitled to because they're paying child support. In that case, you don't need someone to help you fill out the forms. You need someone who will help you figure out how to handle this dispute. Low-income taxpayer clinics will do that. They won't help you file your tax return in most cases, but when you have an issue about your taxes, they will help with that. And so the bottom link on this page will tell people where those clinics are and how to get help from them. Next slide, please. While there's a lot of free tax help, there's also a lot of people who need it. And the free tax sites may not always be able to handle everybody. Some families may decide that they want to pay for services at an organization like H&R Block or something like that. And because even though they'll have to pay, they'll be getting back so much money that it's worth it in order to claim their credit. We obviously would prefer that they got every penny of the credit and didn't pay, but we also can understand that in some cases it will make sense. Unfortunately, while many tax preparers are honest and do a good job, there are others that are not honest or don't do a good job. And so if a family says they're going to pay for tax help, we encourage you to give them the link or the materials at this link on the bottom of the page that tells them how to pick a good tax preparer, a good paid one, because there are unfortunately histories of fraud with some of the paid tax preparers. So you want to help steer them to somebody who's reputable And that link will talk them through how to find a good tax preparer. Next slide, please. In Georgia, what? Can you go back one? Thank you. In Georgia, and you're going to get the slides, so don't try and take a picture. I think the print would be much too small. We've put together a list for you of a bunch of the Atlanta VITA sites. And Alini, will we be sharing all of the actual Excel chart so that they'll get all of these different site locations and phone numbers?
Yeah, I just put the Google Doc link in the chat. So once you have that, you'll have access to all 6 of those areas that we got information on VITA, AARP, and LITCs.
Wonderful. So that'll make it even easier if you're in one of those 6 areas, but you can still use the resources I showed you earlier if you're not in one of those 6 areas to connect families with free tax help. Next slide, please. I also want to take just a moment to talk about how families can get those ITINs if they don't have them. And I want to say up front that this is going to take time because it is a paper form process and the IRS is extremely backed up with people's returns. Encourage people to do it and let them know it's going to take time because it's still worth it to get the money in the end. But I would expect that it's going to take months before they finally get their payment. The way you get an ITIN is you submit a form W-7 along with proof of identity and your foreign status documents along with a paper tax return. You can't file electronically. So typically, first you prepare the application, that W-7, and then you file it with the tax return. Now, the last thing anybody wants to do is mail personal documents to the IRS, which will hold them for some unknown length of time. So the way to avoid that is to make an appointment at a taxpayer assistance center and bring in the original documents where they can certify copies. And so we've given you the links to find those locations and the appointment information, how to make an appointment and what languages they work in. And there's also a list of all the documents that you're going to need in order to file that W-7. So first, people make an appointment at an IRS tax assistance center. They take in all the critical documents. I'm not sure. Alina, do you know if they have to bring the copies with them or they make them at the center?
Copies of the documents? No,
That get certified. The copies that'll get certified. Do they bring those with them?
to the IRS center, you mean?
Yeah.
No, they want to bring the originals.
And then they'll make the copies at the center.
Yeah.
Got it. And then those centers will certify the documents. And when you send in your tax return in the W-7, you send in the certified copies and you hold on to your own. I probably should have said this a little earlier, but I do want to talk about language access in the VITA sites. For the first time this year, the IRS made available to all the VITA sites a language assistance line, which will provide translation services. And most of the VITA sites, we believe, are using it. But if you are working with someone who doesn't speak English and speaks another language, you can ask the VITA site when you make the appointment if they're using the language assistance line and if they can serve the family in that language. Probably they'll be able to. So they don't need you or anyone else to go with them as a translator. There will be a translation service. Next slide, please. It's also a good idea to let families know what documents they need to bring with them to go to a tax appointment, whether it be a VITA site or a paid preparer or whatever. And so we've given you the link that you can print out and give to the family so that they know what documents to collect and bring with them. Next slide. Finally, I just want to talk to you, and remember, you don't have to be an expert on this. If you don't know this, the VITA site will, but a lot of people will have gotten a 6419 letter from the IRS. That's a letter showing how much the IRS thinks they got in the child tax credit. We encourage everybody to go to their IRS online account because those 6419 letters are often not correct. For example, the IRS may have mailed a check to a family and the family may have moved. And so the check got returned, but the IRS hasn't updated their records. So the families knows that they didn't get that full amount, but the IRS thinks they did. The IRS online account should be much more accurate, and that's what they should use. They also did this very strange thing where instead of sending a letter to both members of a married couple filing together, and telling them the full amount of the tax credit. They sent 2 letters to both members of the married couple and gave each of them half the amount. So those are not duplicate letters, and they need to use both letters when they file their tax return, not just one. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to turn this over to Alini, who is going to talk to you about what we learned from our focus groups about common barriers and concerns for claiming the credit, and then show you the resources we've developed to try to make this really easy for you. We've tried to make this simple, cheap, quick, and really make it as easy as possible for you to help families claim this credit. Alini?
Great, thank you, Deb. Okay, so as Deb mentioned, I'm going to go over some of our barriers and concerns. Next slide. So these findings come from lessons we learned from a series of focus groups that we conducted in fall of 2021. And here's a list of all sorts of the different findings that came through. Families responded well to language that emphasized the help CTC provided for the family as a whole, as opposed to findings about long-term benefits to children. They're cautious about overpromising. There were a lot of people who not realizing that the CTC was expanded at all, and that people who weren't eligible in the past are eligible now. There was beliefs around having to work to get the credit, or fear of having to pay the IRS back if they weren't entitled to the credit. There were also fears from individuals who owed back taxes, and also fears around losing other benefits like SNAP, Medicaid, WIC, things like that. There were immigration concerns. There were also concerns around language barriers and access. There are questions and concerns around claiming a child born in 2021. This centered around mainly the non-filer portal, where if somebody used the portal to claim a child that was born in 2021, they couldn't do it through the portal, but now they can by filing a tax return. Also concerns about difficulty getting through the IRS if they had a question, and a desire for in-person help. And as Deb mentioned, all of these concerns are addressed in our toolkits, including an FAQ, all of which you'll have access to. We'll share the link at the end in the chat, but also you'll get a follow-up email with all of these links as well. Next slide. So addressing some of those barriers we mentioned. So the first one, does receiving the CTC impact other public benefits? And the answer to that is getting this credit will not change any federally funded public benefits that a family receives, such as Social Security, SNAP, WIC, childcare subsidies. Next slide. Will an individual ever have to pay this money back? So first of all, the CTC is not alone. If someone receives payments for a child who is no longer their dependent, they may have to pay that money back, but there are some protections for those with incomes below 40,000. That's 50,000 for heads of households, 60,000 for married couples. And then there's limited protections for those with a little bit higher incomes, 80,000 individuals or non-custodial parents, 100,000 single head of household, or 120,000 for couples filing jointly. Next slide. What if someone has not filed tax returns in recent years? So as Deb mentioned earlier, people with very low incomes, under 18,800 for a head of household, 25,100 for married filing jointly, are generally not required to file. Even if they were required to file, generally there isn't a penalty if the IRS owes someone a refund, perhaps from something like the EITC. And taxpayers can file for the past 3 years to receive the refunds that they are owed. So they can go back 3 years as well to get any previous refunds. And even if someone owes something like child support or taxes, back taxes, they can benefit from claiming the CTC. What will essentially happen is the credit will go towards paying off the outstanding child support or taxes first, and they'll receive any amount left over, the difference. if it all goes toward what is owed, that reduces their debt, and it means that they can claim the credits in future years. And this is especially important if the CTC gets expanded, but also there are other credits that people can get, and filing for it, having back taxes shouldn't necessarily hold somebody back, because it can help them take care of those debts. Next slide. Will receiving the CTC affect someone's immigration status or ability to get a green card? The answer to that is no. Under current law, receiving the CTC or any other tax credits will not affect a person's immigration status, their ability to get a green card, or their future immigration plans. Use of tax credits is not considered a public charge by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration. Next slide. Will the IRS share someone's immigration status with other government agencies? The answer to that is also no. The IRS is forbidden to share an individual's tax information with other agencies. There are limited exceptions to this related to certain criminal investigations or to determine someone's tax liability. If anyone was to show up with those kinds of concerns, our suggestion is to then refer them to immigration lawyers, for more direct answers from a professional or an expert in those areas. Next slide. And as I mentioned, our resource toolkit, especially the FAQ, answers these common concerns. That's the link there. I'll share it in the chat in a little bit as well. And has plenty of other resources to help address different questions that can come up from clients and families. Next slide. So we want to talk a little bit about CTC outreach now and what works and what we can suggest, and also what kind of resources are in our toolkits that you can access. So outreach is integrated into existing programs and communications can be really productive and helpful. Families receiving multilingual information multiple times has been shown to be very effective as well. Outreach must include clear referral info with different options for how people can ask questions or get tax prep assistance. That's one of the reasons we're really sharing a lot of the information on VITA, AARP sites, and LITCs, so that people can have somewhere to refer families and individuals to for the next step in how to access the CTC. And broad communication is most effective when it's paired with targeted outreach or follow-up. So communication with high volumes of families, while also being able to connect more deeply on the ground with those at risk of missing out on the CTC. Next slide. And what else works? So school districts and government benefits agencies are amongst the most trusted sources of information for families. So text messages, for example, from schools or agencies can be and have been especially effective. Also, robocalls, emails, and mailers can also be effective. In addition to hearing from trusted community messengers, families may also need to hear from, again, tax experts, immigration or family law experts as well. Next slide. And we've identified two different levels of CTC outreach. First level being just general raising of awareness, and second, deeper engagement on the ground with families. Next slide. Here's an example of level 1 outreach activities. Sending mass text messages, robocalls, and or emails. These are two different scripts. One is a sample text, one is a sample voice message, both of them from the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities. And both of these scripts can be found in our toolkit. Next slide. Also, when it's possible, if you're able to record a phone hold message or a video message for waiting room or office screens, if this is already in place, this is another script that can be used and is ready to go, again, from the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, and that as well is in our toolkit. Next slide. Hanging posters in waiting rooms and other public spaces, distributing flyers, sending home flyers and backpacks. We know that many organizations, many providers already do this. So we are also linking to flyers from the one on the right is from Center in Budget and Policy Priorities. The one on the left is from GMMB. Both of these, I believe, are available in multiple languages as well. And those are also both in the toolkit and ready to use. Next slide. And this is a screenshot of our FAQ that's also in the toolkit. And a couple other level 1 outreach activities we recommend is adding CTC related questions to already existing intake forms to help screen and identify families who could benefit from being given a flyer or having further conversation with or given information on VITA. Also adding flyers and FAQs to resources that are already going out to families can also be very effective. Next slide. And where partners have relationships with state and local benefits agencies or school districts, encouraging them to send out mass communication to beneficiaries and families. So before the tax deadline, we're actually encouraging schools and school groups to take easy actions like sending mass communication or flyers out. This link has the resources you need to do so. It includes a recording to learn more about school outreach and has registration for school outreach info sessions that are happening next week and the following week. So if you're able to, please share widely with schools, districts, school groups. We invite administrators, educators unions, family liaisons, PTAs, school counselors, etc. So that's the first link there, is school outreach resources and info sessions. The second is the second toolkit we have, which is a public agency toolkit. Again, you'll get those links as well provided in the follow-up, and I'll put them in the chat. Next slide. And another level 1 outreach activity, sending out a message in a regular newsletter or post on social media. Those are sample posts. We also have additional sample posts in our toolkit. Next slide. And so level 2 outreach activities, what do those look like? So where possible, being if you're able to hold a phone bank or conduct peer-to-peer texting can be very effective. Also, if it's possible to host a Q&A with a tax specialist, immigration attorney, or other subject matter expert, we encourage that as well. As we mentioned, families often want that additional expertise, and being able to provide it can be really helpful in helping families to move forward through the process and claim their CTC. Next slide. And other level 2 outreach activities, helping families schedule VITA appointments. Again, as we mentioned before, we're providing all of that VITA information so that you don't have to be a tax expert, but you can get people to the tax experts, and just having the information to schedule appointments can be really helpful for providers and organizations. Working in collaboration with local tax sites and partners to make tax prep services accessible. So helping coordinate language interpretation, childcare during appointments, transportation, things like that. And then organizing tax filing or document preparation events, if that's also possible and you have the relationship. So working with VITA volunteers, local university, or other tax specialist volunteers to host tax prep events to help families prepare their necessary documents before a VITA appointment. Next slide. And here is a list of all the different things in our resource toolkit. We have, as I mentioned, we have flyers and posters, we have messaging and press materials, FAQs for service providers. We have social media toolkits. We have links to social media toolkits from Center for Budget and Policy Priorities and a couple of other partners. We have resources for immigrant families and resources for tracking outcomes, all sorts of different information. It will be available in there. Next slide. And if you're interested, you can join our child tax credit email list. Through the email list, you'll get updates on whenever we have additional trainings that are open to the public. You'll also get any updates for new resources that are in our toolkits, as well as any other general updates on the CTC overall. Next slide. If you're also interested in getting your own unique Get Your Refund URL, you can reach out to me. Deb went over Get Your Refund earlier. You can specifically get a URL that's for your organization, and through that URL, you can actually track what people are using most often. If they're preferring to do it themselves, or if they're looking for in-person assistance, all those things you would have access to with your own URL. Next slide. And now we'll open up to Q&A. Zoe is also going to put a poll up on the screen with a couple of quick questions that we would love if you could take the time to answer for us, just to get a beat on what people have been doing and are interested in doing and what they think is most useful. And we'll give you a minute to answer those questions.
It always takes a while. That first minute, I'm always thinking, can they see it? Is there a problem? Here come the answers. They can see it. Have we put the toolkit bit.ly in the chat?
I'm doing that right now.
Excellent. If you've already filled out the poll, the other thing we'd be very grateful if you would do it is put in the chat the name of your organization and the number of families that you're going to be trying to reach out to, some sense of how many people you might be able to reach. We would be very grateful to learn that. And the other thing that we would love is if you've looked at, heard what Alini said about the toolkit, are there resources you would like that we didn't create that we should add to the toolkit? Is there some strategy for outreach that we could make easier for you to do? So if you want to pop that in the chat as well, that would be wonderful. And then, of course, we would love to answer any questions you may have. I know we've talked a lot about who's eligible and who's not, and that can seem very technical. The real bottom line here is almost any family with a young child in it is eligible, or with any child in it under age 18. The child has to have been 17 or younger by the end of 2021. And if you don't know if they're eligible to claim the credit, they should go see a tax expert and learn if they're eligible and how to claim it. So you don't need to be that tax expert, but you do need to help them reach that tax expert. It looks like most people seem to have answered. We'll give them a moment more and we'll share it. But I do ask you also to put in the chat who you are, is your organization a Head Start? How many students do you have? Something that'll give us a sense of how many families you might be able to reach out to. All right, Zoe, do you want to share the results? I'm noticing that most of you are not doing the outreach right now, and you're not saying that you'll consider it. I wonder if any of you can let us know why you won't, and if there's something that we could do that would make it more doable for you to do this outreach. Can we maybe have a conversation around that? And I would encourage you, if you prefer, to just put up your hand and we'll unmute you and then you can talk. That raise your hand function is at the bottom of the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Zoe, have we shared the poll results?
Yes, they're up.
Okay. All right, we can probably stop sharing the poll results, but I really would love to know what, why people are not doing this and if there's anything we can do to make it more doable. Oh, Bonnie, thank you for responding there. So are you work with an organization that works with foster parents, and how many foster parents can you reach? I should also say, have we finalized the foster parent fact sheet, Alina, yet?
I have to double check. It's in the toolkit. I think there might be one update still waiting.
So there are some special resources for foster parents, because foster parents are eligible not only for the child tax credit, but for the earned income tax credit and the child and dependent care tax credit, which helps cover some of the costs of childcare. So I would encourage you, Bonnie, to look at that. And thank you so much for being willing to let the other foster parents know. Does anyone else want to talk about what might make them more likely to help families claim this credit? Curious, are you guys not in a position to make that decision? Is that part of the problem? That this would be something that your boss or a higher level administrator would do? And if that's the case, are there ways to get them this? All right, clearly people are not comfortable talking about this, and I will respect that. Thank you so much for joining us today. I do want to say again that if you take this back and you realize you need more information or you'd like some help reaching out to families, please do reach out to Alini. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you help families claim this credit. Thank you so much for joining us today and have a great day.